So our friend Greg Wrubell's been behind the mic calling BYU sports since 1996 as basketball play-by-play voice, and 2001 as the radio voice of BYU football, also the voice for BYU baseball and women's soccer, right now preparing both mentally and physically for BYU's first season in the Big 12. So what were you worried about the most when the legendary play-by-play man Paul James retired with Lavelle back in 2000, and the microphone, as it were, was handed to you, when most of our lives we had only heard Paul James?
Well, first of all, I don't know that I would have gotten the opportunity when Paul James stepped down in 2000 had he not had an issue in 1996 that put me in his spot
heart?
for 6 weeks. Right. He had that heart issue.
Yeah.
So he was on the sidelines for 6 weeks, and I was an emergency fill-in. I got to do one BYU football game, the WAC title game against Wyoming in 1996 in Vegas.
That. Yeah.
And I got all the basketball games he missed over that month and a half, 2 month span where he was recovering from 6 bypasses surgery. So I was the emergency fill-in. I'd never called a game of any kind at any level. At any level.
Not even hockey?
Nothing.
Wow.
The only thing I had done was been his sideline guy since 1992. So I'd had those years on the crew with Paul. So I got to get the sense of how to do the job by wearing the headset and the jetpack and being on the sidelines and being part of his pregame, in-game, halftime, postgame coverage. I got to be around him and sense how it's done. But I'd never called a game at any level. I had the experience of learning how to do it by listening, but that's it.
Yeah.
So, and guys, there are so many days that I wear the headset down there, and I would think about what he did, and I would tell myself, I could never do that. Just too hard.
Yeah.
He's so good at it. I mean, I'm still trying to, follow the ball and find out where it's going. He's already made the call, and I'm just trying to catch up in my mind with what he's calling. I thought, how amazing is that? And I really did have that prevailing thought, I could never do this. It's just so difficult, and he's so good at it. So that's the prevailing thought I had, and suddenly, the pregame of the 1996 BYU-Utah game, he's up in the booth at then Rice Stadium. I don't think it was Rice Eccles yet, Rice Stadium. And we're in the pregame. And our engineer, John Donnell, the late great, not great, he's not late, he's great. John Donnell, KSL engineer, was our football engineer, spoke down to me in my headset and said, you might need to get up here. This is during pregame of the BYU-Utah game. And I said, what's going on? He goes, well, Paul's having something, an episode, something's going on with Paul. Just be ready. And I clearly wasn't ready. And as it turned out, Paul decided he would carry on with the game. They had done, they assessed him during, paramedics came to the booth. And the EMTs assessed his situation and said, Mr. James, you've had a cardiac issue here. You need to get to a hospital. He's like, well, this is the BYU-Utah game.
Yeah, you can't leave that.
I feel I'll take a couple pills and I'll do the game and I'll check myself in after the game, but I'm not missing this game. And sure enough, he did not miss the game. And I think there's probably there's video of the telecast that day showing PJ in the booth, and they kind of told the story on the TV side of what the radio guy had gone through just to call the game. So Paul calls the game, and thankfully for him, I think, and all of us, it wasn't a dramatic game. It was kind of a blowout for BYU. Mm-hmm. They ran the ball forever, threw the ball like 12 times.
Yeah, I remember them asking Norm after the game, why did you keep running? He goes, because they couldn't stop us.
I think literally Sark was maybe 7 for 12 that day.
It was crazy.
Just ran the ball for 400-odd yards, won the game easily. And Paul does go to the hospital right after. And they do a quick assessment and say, you need sextuple bypass surgery ASAP. And so he calls me from the hospital and says, Greg, I've got a heart issue. I'm going into surgery. We've got a game at Seattle, BYU and Utah, or BYU and Washington basketball here in 2 days. You got to call the game. So Paul basically kind of put me on a plane and said, go. And that was it for me. So that was the start of it. I had never called a game, and yet I was on a plane Monday. Paul Ruffner, his broadcast partner, was, kind enough to stay with me for those few games and work with me. But I called my first ever game of any kind as an emergency fill-in for Paul James at University of Washington on a Tuesday night in early December of 1996, and that was the 1-in-25 season for BYU.
Yeah, did you get to call the Utah State game that
they
won?
Yeah, Paul didn't get any
there
wins.
You go.
I got the one win.
How much fun was that?
That was, in the end, it was really fun. That was all we got. But my first game I called, BYU lost 95-44.
Oh, brother.
A 51-point loss.
That is not easy to call.
And there were a lot of big losses to come that year. And, of course, Roger gets let go a few games into that, and then Tony Eagle comes on. That was my entree to play-by-play. And after that year, so Paul came back in 6 weeks, And then he made the decision at that point that he would do home games. I would do road games to end the year in basketball. So I got those 6 weeks, everything. Then we split home road. Then he said after that season, I'm football only.
Yeah.
So by saying I'm football only, that gave me a few seasons of basketball to hopefully get a little better at the craft, to where when he stepped down in 2000, I might have made more sense as a fill-in because I'd had some reps. But if he'd gone full health to 2000 and said he and Lavelle were gone at the end, who's to say that KSL doesn't open up a nationwide search and bring in somebody? And I'm not the guy because I didn't have the reps, but I got reps thanks to that situation. And the old luck is preparation meets opportunity situation. Kind of, I had some preparation, I had an opportunity, and that was an element of luck in my career.
I called UNLV football for, I think, 10 years while we were in the Mountain West, while that was going on. So I know what it's like to call losing seasons. And there were seasons where we didn't win. But
UNLV football, BYU basketball.
Your first season, 25 losses and the one win. I remember, and I'll ask you, I remember tears came to my eyes as I'm calling San Diego State's down in Vegas to win the WAC and go to their first Holiday Bowl, and they miss a field goal, a chip shot, and they had like the best kicker in the country, and UNLV won, and they carried Jeff Horton off, and that was 1-11, I believe, that season. I remember getting emotional because I knew how much it meant to all those guys and how hard losing was, and so you go through 1-25 season. And then you see it get turned around. You can't help but be emotionally connected to the outcome.
And for your situation there, the one win came at the end.
Yeah.
Right. So but BYU's one win came pretty early in the 1-25. There were a lot of losses still to come, and that's why I was just so grateful to Tony Ingle for a first-year play-by-play guy to deal with a losing team. To have someone like that be the guy you've got to work with and deal with, I mean, there could be no better situation.
Was he one of the most positive people you've ever been around in your lifetime?
He made it as enjoyable a 1-in-25 years it could possibly be.
Right.
Because of who he was and how he was and how he treated me and made me feel like I was going to be okay at this. And so Tony was... I mean, he was the saving grace of that season for me. And although it didn't work out for him to continue with BYU, you know, I certainly didn't stop following Tony Ingle. And to see the career successes he had down the line was so rewarding. And there were so many cool little mini stories and things that happened with Tony's life that brought me reflecting to that 1-in-25 season and how pleasant he could have made it for a very unpleasant situation. I was really blessed.
Yeah, Tony Ingle, one of the great human beings ever. Like, what a great human.
It was funny. Late in that year, it was a Billy Tubbs TCU team, and they swept BYU that year. But down at Fort Worth, they were smoking BYU. We were getting drilled, and he decided to keep his starters in until they got to 100. That was a big deal to him.
Oh, my goodness.
And,
sounds like Tubbs.
Yeah, and BYU, there was no chance BYU was going to compete in that game, and yet he wanted his starters in to get to the 100. And Tony said after the game, you know, I've got a long memory. And years later, Kennesaw State played Billy Tubbs' Lamar team in a tournament in Alaska, I think. And they were head-to-head for the first time since that game, I think, and Tony's team won.
Oh, man.
And I texted Tony that night, and I said, do you remember? And he said he did. And it was kind of a cool moment because, and again, he's not a vengeful guy, but it was just kind of funny that you know, Billy kind of kind of turned the screw a little bit that night when he didn't need to, and it was fun to see Tony kind of get one back years later. And
I wish I would have watched that game just for Tony.
What goes around always comes around.
Always comes around. Yeah. So you know, Dave's done a lot of radio. I've done a little bit of radio and mostly television.
And it's funny. I hate to interrupt you, but you know, we would go to Vegas and call the games there, and we'd have the opposing play-by. And so Dave would be on our air as the
I'd pop in there in a UNLV shirt.
He'd get the red sweater.
Preview.
I'll tell you something funny about that. All UNLV fans knew I was from BYU, and they were fine with me calling the games, except for that game where they just never felt like I was as excited for UNLV as I was for BYU. And I'm like, you know, you always hear what you're listening for sure. Right. But I was sitting there thinking.
Dave recruited me to come down and do, when he started to go over and do some of the TV stuff for UNLV in the preseason football and basketball. He vouched for me, and we got to do a bunch of UNLV stuff.
So John Robinson, surrounded by BYU guys, were like, "Hey, that's that."
And Jay Rob's like, "Hey, I like BYU guys. I like BYU," because he had a close relationship with Fred Whittingham back in the day. And Jay Rob's like, "Yeah, I know Mormon guys. I know BYU guys. You guys are great." He's really good to us.
I cut you off. I'm sorry.
No, I was just gonna say, so radio. it's a different animal than television. And in television, we're kind of watching a screen. We know everybody else is watching that screen. We don't want to say too much because people can see so we're trying to augment that a little bit. But in radio, you have to paint the picture. Like, they can't see it. And so you've got to paint it for them so everybody in their mind's eye can watch that game in their head as you're calling. That's a lot of responsibility to be able to come up with the words game after game to paint that picture so people can visualize that game in their mind. How do you do that? And how fun is it knowing that you have that responsibility?
Yeah, it's been a great career-long challenge. And you say, there's a worry about maybe saying too much. And my worry is, I can't say enough. I've got to hopefully get as much detail into the call as I possibly can. And that's the career-long quest, is to try and find different ways to say the same thing. Find interesting and unique ways to describe places on the floor, places on the field, the way things are done. And so, every game for me is the chance to be a little bit better and be a little bit different and find something new to give the audience. And that's why I'm always listening to a lot of play-by-play when I drive around to and from games. I'm listening on my Sirius XM to other calls of other games to try and find out who out there is doing those things and what kind of things are being said. What can I maybe borrow and incorporate? Kevin Harlan is a great TV play-by-play guy. He's a great radio play-by-play guy. Great. He's known because people see him and they know who Kevin Harlan is. He calls a lot of radio games, and I don't know that anyone is as good of modern-day broadcasters at putting more detail into a call than Kevin Harlan. And every time I listen, I'm amazed and pick up something else that I would never have thought to describe that he does. The way a quarterback's towel flaps off his belt, and the way he licks his fingers before taking the snap. Things that and he's squeezing these things into a call, and I'm just always blown away. He's so good at it. And that's what I, strive to be, is good at incorporating as much detail as possible without overloading the audience, making it too cluttered, and still giving space for someone like Hans to do his job and shine in his own way. And every sport has its own unique rhythm. And so that's the great thing, too, is calling 4 sports. You have 4 different ways to call a game and 4 different ways to incorporate a broadcast partner, and ideally 4 different ways to please an audience. But the great thing about radio is that you are everything to that listener. I was at the airport last night with baseball. We were coming back from, where were we?
Yes, Pullman,
Washington.
That's right. We were in Spokane.
I'm imagining the weather wasn't much better than this, was it?
No, we were delayed last night getting out of Spokane. And we were talking to the baseball staff and I, and Trent was talking about that same, Trent Pratt, about the suspense builds when you're listening to a game on the radio driving and you're waiting for the play to transpire, and you've only got the guy, and so he says it's an emotional connection to a broadcast when that's everything for you. You can't see it happening.
The phrase, you hang on every word. Yeah. You have to, right? It's awesome.
Yeah.
It's an awesome medium.
How many games do you think you've called?
I don't know. I had a list.
Like ballpark it.
Probably between 1,000 and 1,500, something like that. I used to have, I've got to update it. It's been a few years. I had a list going for a while where the different sports I called, I had my season by season totals, but I haven't gone to it for a few years, but I probably need to.
So probably 1,500, probably up.
Brenda helped me calculate once, and it was a few years ago, and we had passed 1,000. I'd passed 1,000. She didn't pass 1,000, although she calls them right alongside me. But but I'd passed 1,000. We need to go back and count them up.
Yeah, I'm going to do that. I know that BYU gave me a nice recognition when I hit 200 football games.
Yeah,
that's kind of a big number, and I'm probably closer to 300 now with football. I'd like to get to 400. That seems to me like kind of a milestone number for the longer-term broadcasters.
Football, when you think about football,
it's 12, 13
max
a year.
You have 13, 14 and 1 year. So 14 and 1 year.
So you're talking about 30-plus years of doing that to get to 400. So, but I will go back and maybe, but I haven't done it for a few years. But it's a big number.
So we probably estimate 1,500 maybe.
Yeah. So before you tonight announce your top 3 of all time, let's run over a couple of...
By the way, can I just say how patently unfair it is?
It's terribly unfair.
To try and go
but
to 3.
I gave you a day's notice.
Yeah, I know. He's never made me do that.
I get my 3, but then I got the second 3.
Well, let's make it even a little harder. Let's talk about a couple that could possibly be in the top 3, and then we'll have you announce your top 3. But of course, back to Harleen, which we relived a little bit with the alumni game. Last week, as Beck and Harleen were back together on the field. That one was, and don't spoil it for us if that's in your group, because we're just going to go down a list.
Ideas, and we're having people think, oh yeah, that might be my favorite.
But that one was pretty cool for a variety of reasons. And it's the start of a play. What's great about sports is you start the play with no idea how it's going to end, and then it ends in such sensational fashion.
Right. That was, okay, we're not spoiling.
No, you
anything.
don't spoil it.
No.
All right, then we'll just move on to the next one.
So how about the Mangum Miracle? He and I were standing right on the sideline for that, right where it happened, where Tanner at Nebraska completes the ball to Matthews. This is 2015.
How was that one for you?
Yeah, is that?
It's up there.
Yeah, there you go.
Jeez, I didn't know we were just listing his top three.
We're like watching it, and
Suddenly this isn't very hard.
He goes, he caught it, and I go, was he over the goal line? We both go, we don't know.
Yeah.
And the official,
had to wait.
They're going, we're going to have to wait till they,
And just before that, we were sitting there going, man, these things never happened to us. Not since 1980 have these things happened for us.
Right.
And they got it.
And then it did.
And that was before, like, in our broadcast in the alumni game the other day, Kyle Van Noy is the only guy that say, well, the reason Matthews just dropped that because the shorts are too high.
He did go short.
Maybe some truth to that.
Yeah.
So now Luke Staley's touchdown run to beat the Utes
2001.
in 2001 and that brought the house down. And I'm going to assume that's not in your top three, so tell us what you remember about that.
Near disaster.
Oh, no.
Okay.
See, this is why we ask these kind of hard-hitting questions.
You all know that the press box glass is pretty thick at LaVell Edwards Stadium, right?
Yeah.
Thank goodness it is, because I pumped my fist as he went down the sidelines and I hit the glass.
Oh, no.
Okay, my
It's
knuckle,
also tempered. It's
my
the second
knuckle,
tempered.
my knuckle starts to bleed. Like I punched the glass, not thinking. I mean,
In jubilation or what?
No, I was just fist pumping in jubilation. And I hit the glass, and so much that it injured my knuckle as I'm calling the play. But there are press boxes where glass breaks, and you've seen. I mean,
Right, it just fall right down onto people.
right, if it's the wrong kind. And so that was what I remember from that was, first of all, the place shook.
Yeah.
And again, the windows don't open at LaVell Edwards Stadium. We are insulated from everything, but even through the crowd mics, it was as loud as I felt I'd ever heard that place, and the place was shaking. And I hit that glass and just was so glad that was the thick stuff, because there are press boxes where it's thin glass and it could have been a really bad situation.
If that was Wyoming, that glass is gone.
Yeah. So, and I
just
thought
saying.
about that. Yeah.
Not that Wyoming's press box is old.
I was in the media room I stayed in the media room to watch the end of that game. It was on ESPN2 when they had the funny logo. Just before the Hakeem Rockman-Lennox Lewis fight at Mandalay Bay, I think it was. But I wasn't leaving. And it was just one, I can't believe he went untouched for 30 yards in a play where it didn't even look like he was open when Doman pitched it to him.
It was a short side pitch.
Yeah.
And how did he have the room to run that? I mean, he sped down. It was an amazing play.
Amazing.
Yeah.
It's Luke.
All right, let's go to this next amazing one.
Yeah, we can talk about Luke.
This could be on the list.
So we're talking about the Hill Leaps Texas 2014 run. We kind of talked about that.
He hopped right in front of us. We're down there at the 10-yard line, but you had to describe it.
Yeah, I remember just screamed hurdle. I think my voice cracked on that. Yeah, it's a hurdle. And you didn't expect it.
One of the most memorable plays in BYU history for sure.
And sometimes you sit there and go, "Can I believe? I can't believe what I'm seeing, but I have to describe it."
Yeah, and I hope I did a good job with it.
Yeah.
That was fun.
That was a good one.
All right, let's go to Jaron Hall, leading BYU past Utah. A day after getting invited to the Big 12.
Yeah, so
a lot of emotion.
It wasn't because of course the outcome is the outcome, but it was a game BYU wins by a decent margin. It was more about what it meant after 9 straight losses and on a week where they get in. It was just this culmination. Like, could this week go any better for BYU? So it was more about a kind of a big picture culmination event. You get the P5 stamp of approval on the same weekend. You end the streak to your rivals. You're not going to see them for a few years. This will be the last memory for a long time, and you did it the right way, and you finally broke it was just a special moment, weekend that kind of culminated a lot of things instead of just one, maybe say play or end of a game, because the game, there was no drama in it at the end, but yet you could still count it down and enjoy it and savor it.
When Hall turned the corner and ran 50 yards for a touchdown, was called back because his toes stepped on the thing, which probably robbed you of a great moment, because in the stadium, everyone thought he was inbounds.
Yeah.
So he turns the corner and then just goes, and it's almost like justice finally being served.
Yeah. I thought at that moment, well, it's going to happen. It's going to happen, right?
Yeah.
Even though it came back.
That was I do remember that as one of the best weeks to ever be a Coug, right? That was amazing.
All right, let's take it up a notch here.
So how about Jimmer and number 9 BYU beats number 4 San Diego State in Provo in 2011?
Yeah, really both San Diego State wins were epic.
Were epic,
amazing. Really. Yeah. So I think the two games as a collection were just some of the most intense and just energized moments with two really good basketball teams featuring professionals on both sides, and it was just the height of competition. Amazing intensity. Going into San Diego State, and even just the night before the game with Vern Lundquist being there and Steve Kerr being there, and the big CBS crew ready to call the game the next day, and knowing just how big this had gotten, couldn't wait for the day to arrive. And then the day arrives, and man, to win in that environment at Viejas, the way they did it, I think Charles Abuo might have banked in a corner 3 that hit the side of the backboard, right. And early. That's okay. If that's going to happen, BYU could be okay here today.
They might be all right. Yeah. That was fun. How about BYU beats number 1 Gonzaga in Spokane in 2017?
Yeah, the back-to-back Gonzaga wins are all pretty cool. I mean, because nobody wins up there.
But these guys were number 1, and remember, they already had the headline printed of being 30
of
and
their little paper.
So when Nate Austin goes up, blocks that shot,
and chased it down.
Chased it down.
Yeah.
The most improbable of all improbables, and you're describing it.
Yeah, I don't remember what I said or how I said it, but it was that sense that no one does this, and BYU's going to do this. And then to have done it, 3 straight years was pretty cool too.
And knowing what that meant for Dave Rose, did that make it more meaningful?
I was hoping, my hope was always that when you would beat Gonzaga there, it would be to win a championship, win a WCC championship. Yeah. And it never broke that way. You were good enough to beat Gonzaga on their floor. I was hoping one of those years it would have been something that locked it down, but it didn't turn out that way for BYU. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I kept waiting for the year where they'd win that the tournament championship down there. Just never
has.
Now, Gonzaga will rebuild now that BYU's getting out of the league.
Right.
Well, every year we think it's going to be a dip year. We see what their dip year looks like.
Yeah, exactly. This was the least talented team that Mark's had, and they were.
Yeah. And Gonzaga, it's just. Man, it's amazing of what they did when BYU joined the league. Because when BYU joined, it felt like BYU and Gonzaga were kind of similar. Like BYU just beaten Gonzaga in the NCAA tournament. Right. There was no sense that this was going to be something where someone pulls away from the other. So kudos to what Gonzaga did in those 12 years.
Mark's done a phenomenal job during that run. So we had the number 1 one. We also had the BYU beating Gonzaga number 2 in Provo.
Now that was an electric night.
In 2020, the Marriott Center that night was like ridiculous.
Yeah, but it's so bittersweet, right? Yeah. I mean, because you look back at it and you realize that was like the last happy moment we'd have that year. They were 1 and done in the conference tournament, and then everything shut down. Yeah. So it is so bittersweet. Because at how good TJ and Jake and Yoli were together, and to never have tasted the NCAA tournament with that group, that's just it's the ultimate.
But on that night,
I submit that there are 2 teams that in the last 10 years. The biggest, I don't know what you want to call it, gyp job, BYU and Dayton that year. I think Dayton could have won a national championship that year. And BYU was, a Sweet 16 team at least.
Yeah, I just felt they were going to be at least that year. The shooting was so good. They were the number 1 3-point team in the country that year.
And veteran leadership and all of the pieces, right?
It was all set up.
In that game, toward the end, Yoli gets a two-handed dunk that sealed it.
Exactly.
And place is going bananas. You're down there in the front row.
Yeah.
You see the play develop, and then here it goes, and you can feel the satisfaction.
Mark Durant already knows this because he's been on the receiving end of it for years. But on really big plays and really big moments, he is my release. I will hug him. I will hit him. I will. I mean, he said it's a good thing he's a big guy, but he said he doesn't even feel it anymore. But I pound his shoulder non-stop throughout the course of a season. He's the guy. I let out my energy on him physically.
It's good that he's big. He can withstand that.
And again, like you said, I barely even feel you. You're so small, Greg. But he's the guy that is on the receiving end of all of that energy, and happily he just takes it and doesn't prevent me from expressing myself that way. But he gets a lot of physical abuse from me, and I know he did on that moment from Yoli for sure.
He did mention, we had Mark here, we had Devin and Mark on the show. Mark never ever talked about abuse at all.
No,
he just talked about how much he loves working.
I think he's gotten help, and he's worked his work through it. Doesn't even bother him.
He's all good. So,
how about women's soccer making their run to the College Cup in 2021?
Yeah, how about that? Yeah, that's up there too.
Yeah. Okay. So he's not going to give. So that might. I think that
felt
might be
like
the
that
top.
gave
that
some
felt
away.
like something.
All
yeah.
right, so are you ready?
I
Have we missed
have to
any?
tell you,
Okay,
of all the coaches we've had come in, and we've had almost all of them, all the head coaches to get ready for the Big 12. When we had Jen in here, Jen Rockwood, the soccer coach, and we asked her, we said, okay, is this program the most prepared of all the programs to go into the Big 12? And she goes, oh yeah, we're going to compete for a championship the very first year we're in it. We're not afraid of that league at all.
Yeah, no, I won't be surprised.
I loved her confidence.
No, it will not be a shock at all if women's soccer contends and wins this thing and immediately becomes the first Big 12 team to win a championship. They're ready. They're bringing back everybody.
Yeah, I loved her confidence, but it's not unfounded. Like,
no, this is
there's
a national,
reason
this is
for
a
her.
national
It's a
powerhouse
top 5
program.
Yeah,
right. And the Big 12 has a couple teams that they'll be right there too, but BYU's right in the mix. Like there's no sense of having to acclimate. And again, BYU I think should contend right away.
Yeah, that's
Greg Wrubell, the radio voice of BYU football, basketball, baseball, and soccer on the Wise Guys Tonight live on YouTube, Facebook, Twitch, and wiseguys.com. And he's ready to announce his top three
I'm
calls, moments of his BYU career.
Do three and then two and then one.
Here's the thing. First of all, I don't think it's right that I have to just pick three. It's way too hard. What if do
you want to give us a couple honorable mentions?
I do want to have my three honorable mentions and then my top three. Is that
okay? Yeah, that's fine.
All right.
And when I say my honorable mentions, they could all be tied for third. They should be tied for third. I don't want to shortchange anybody.
Okay, so here's what we'll do: the three honorable mentions, and then we will go 3, 2, 1.
Okay.
With one being the ultimate
we didn't even
moment.
mention, and I don't know, maybe
Feels like we already announced them.
One of my favorite games I've ever called.
Okay, I'll say this: of the 6, if I were going to name 6, let's say we already hit 5. Okay, so there's only one you're missing.
Okay.
Well,
I wonder if this is the one. I don't know though. One of my favorite games I've ever called, and we called a lot of the same games, right?
Right.
Was when I called the BYU Utah game where Jimmer made the half court shot.
Right. People thought about that too. We were discussing. In fact, baseball and us we were talking about this thing last night.
Yeah.
And that was one of the things that was brought up.
See, we were giving you some stuff to think about on the road.
I always give her Jimmer credit because my call on that, I made a comment when he made that shot, and Sports Center that night. Sometimes they'll talk over the video. Other times they'll just let the call be the call.
They'll lay out and
well, they just let our NBC call be the call. And so I just said, yeah, look at him. He's completely unfazed. I mean, he's just like, yeah, I'm Jimmer Fredette. That's what I do. I make shots.
That's right. I remember that.
And that was the #1 Sports Center play. All my friends from New York called, dude, you were the #1 player. So that one's special to me. But that game was also pretty special because he was ridiculous that night.
And I remember they took him out shy of a chance to get 50.
Oh, yeah.
Dave took him out. And it was the half-court shot. I went nuts. Mark went nuts. It was crazy.
You know what? And we probably should have, just out of the Jimmer night to beat Ainge's record in Vegas, probably should be in the mix too. But I don't want to give anything about when he had 52. I don't want to give that away.
Game. Yeah, that was crazy.
All right, let's go. The honorable mentions, the Wrubell's honorable mentions. You got 3.
I've only ever called one national championship game. And so BYU defeating Santa Clara in penalty kicks to get to the national championship in 2021 has to be right there. I mean, the drama of playing the 90 minutes, going to PKs, beating Santa Clara on their own field to get to the national championship.
I love that.
We were watching it.
Huge. Yep. And again, I consider it tied for third. Okay, that's how I kind of look at this thing.
Yeah.
All right. Then we will go with the win over Utah in 2021 to end the streak on the week that BYU gets into the Big 12.
All right.
Okay. I like that.
Yep. And then I want to go with Jimmer Fredette's night at Utah. You mentioned the half-court shot.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. And now we go 3, 2, 1.
Now we go number 3 of the
I knew
1500.
that was in there because I love calling that game too. That was a great game.
Number 3, Jimmer's 52 in Las Vegas against San Diego, against New Mexico.
New Mexico.
Here's the
semis.
Thing. They had lost 3 games to that point. UCLA in non-conference, right? And then New Mexico beat them twice.
Right.
So
Jimmer had the flu, I believe, at home. I don't know if he played in the one at home.
And then the one right after they had Jimmer both games. Down at the pit, it was a great game from Snell. Tony Snell went off. And then, of course, right after Brandon Davies, they had to play New Mexico at home, and they weren't right mentally and lost that game.
Right. Okay.
So anyway, they were 0-2 against New Mexico, and this was to get to the title game against San Diego State in Las Vegas, and it was 2 records broken on the same night, where he breaks Danny's career record and he breaks the single-game record. And I just remember my energy as he approached 50.
And you were in Vegas. And it was Vegas.
And he's doing it with no free throws.
No free throw. He had one free throw attempt.
Right.
The whole game.
Even though he got fouled all night long.
Yeah. So Jimmer's 52, beating a team that had beaten them twice to get to the title game, and breaking 2 records on the same night with Danny in the crowd. I thought was right there.
It was pretty awesome.
Okay,
That was an awesome night.
that is a worthy number 3.
Yeah. Number 2, and now these next 2, the top 2, how often do you get to call a play where your team goes from losing to winning with zeros on the clock? Zeros on the clock.
Yeah.
Okay, so these are game-winning plays, zeros on the clock, and number 2 is the Mangum and Matthews Hail Mary at Nebraska. Again, I've called 1 Hail Mary in my career. That's the one.
That's awesome.
Okay. We don't consider the John Beck to Harleen call a Hail Mary because they're so close to the goal line. This is a true Hail Mary, right?
Yeah, right.
So,
and was the Boise State one? That was too early.
No, because
they still scored another touchdown.
Kai still had to make a pick to seal the deal.
That's right.
Yeah, it was great. It was kind of a last gasp.
It was a fourth down. The game riding.
Right. If they don't make the play, the game's probably.
Jurgens.
Yeah, but Mitchell, my guy, makes a great play. But we still had kind of Kua picking 6 right out the other. So that's number 2, right? Mangum Matthews.
Yeah, and the number 1 of all time.
Back to Harleen.
It has to be.
Yeah, I mean that was. I mean, it's Utah. It's at their place. Zeros on the clock, and the play takes forever. Right? It just it's stretched out and out. So the drama
without a penalty,
drama built with every second. And after all that, how is somebody going to be open at all of that? After all of that, just the way the whole thing unfolded, and that was probably like the play where people said they made it their ringtone when they would come up to me and say, "Hey, I've got your call." That was kind of a moment where I was like, "Oh, that was kind of a seminal moment." It was one that kind of resonated with Cougar Nation.
So here's where I was when I listened to your call. I'm on I-15. I had a Temple assignment in Vegas, and I was coming from that, and I was going to Channel 8 where I was anchoring the sports that day. And I'm listening to the game on the radio. I've kind of gotten over the fact that I had a Temple assignment during the game. Not sure how that all came to be, but I remember coming from there on I-15, ready to pull off on the Sahara exit to go downtown to where Channel 8 was, and that's where I heard it.
Yeah.
I was standing on the goal line right behind the goalpost with Brady Whittingham on my right with my headset on. I had to interview the winning coach because I was doing that game. And this is the thing I remember. I remember the last play, but I remember when Utah came down and scored to go ahead. Mm-hmm. Brady looked up at the scoreboard. Then he looked at me and he goes, "Crap." And I go, "What?" He goes, "We're going to lose. They left way too much time."
But
prophetic, right?
Yeah,
prophetic that Brady said that.
That is so much had to happen in that drive too. There were so many great plays made to set up that final play. But back to Harleen is kind of the one.
Oh, what a phenomenal! Yeah. The atmosphere down on the field was crazy.
People still ask me who was screaming in the booth because it's part of the call. And that was Ralph Sokolowski.
It was Ralph, that's right.
My statistician. And in fact,
had to explain that a few
times.
Yeah, in fact,
I had to go back and listen to the 2001 Luke Staley touchdown we talked about earlier. I was listening to that last week for a different project, and he was there again. I could hear him again.
Yeah.
Ralph lets it out, man.
Let's talk about a couple of snubs.
What? A couple of snubs?
Couple of snubs. The Hall to George overtime touchdown.
Yeah, I'm leaving out great games. I am.
That was a
That's why you didn't want to do this.
That's
now you do this.
That's why we went down this road.
Going to do this.
That's an overtime winner against Utah.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. There's the Utah.
I think it's important for people to realize how many big moments you've been in.
Right. Well, that was his favorite play. Max told us.
Well, then 4th and 18, right? As part of the game where Harvey rumbles in and gets another win over Utah. I mean, wins over Utah are epic.
Yeah, they're always great.
Let's see. We had the win at Wisconsin.
Yeah, great. Field goal at the end.
Yeah. The field goal that they missed with their kicker, who was like, I don't know why we always play the best kickers in the country, but he shanked that one.
Yeah, did you call the UCLA block field goal?
Ethan Manumaileuna.
Yeah, the block by Ethan.
Yeah. I told Dave this was not fair.
I know, but
now we're doing this.
Then there was the NCAA tournament down by what? However many points came back to win
against Iona.
So there was that one.
Yeah,
that's nice.
Oh my! And the side story on that one. So there's a lot going on that night.
The beauty of this live stream is there's no end until we're done.
That was the night President Obama was in the building. in Dayton. And so the security was unbelievable. So my normal pregame routine was all out of whack in terms of how long it took me to get into the building, get to my spot, because the president was in the building that night with, I think, David Cameron, the PM of Great Britain. So they were there for this basketball game, and it jacked everything up. So I was all out of whack in terms of timing, getting to my routine. And beyond that, I was getting sick. My voice was going, and I could tell. That's the worst feeling when you know you don't have your voice. And beyond that, Mark Durant couldn't do the game.
Who was doing it? Who filled
No
in?
one. I was solo.
Oh, my goodness.
Okay. So all these things coming together, and I'm getting sick, and they go down 25. I think, well, at least I'll have a nice, I won't have to get too excited because, it's going the way it's going. I won't, wreck my voice. But sure enough, they come back, and I wreck my voice because of how the game went. I had to scream and yell, and it was just going nuts. So I really destroyed my voice that night. And now we had to go down to Louisville and play in the their real opener 2 days later. Right. I had doctors on the phone. I was literally picking up pharmacies in Dayton after midnight to try and get my, and then luckily a couple days later I had enough to get through the Marquette game that we lost, but that was a wild night.
How about the TJ Haas buzzer beater at Houston?
Didn't call it.
You weren't on that one?
That was Shep and Mark Durant.
Because football was.
I think I had soccer NCAA tournament that night.
Is that what that was?
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
So Shep had that with Mark, and Mark memorably was he gets hugged by players on the sideline.
They came and hugged. Who hugs the radio guy? Everything's doing. And then Dave and Cheryl were right there watching. It was just a magical moment.
Yeah, that was Shep and Mark.
Andrew Waugh wants to know what's the best month of Cougar sports in your career?
November's always the wildest, most exciting month because football's still going, basketball's starting, and soccer's into its postseason usually right there. So that's when I'm hopping all over the place trying to squeeze everything in. So November is the wildest, busiest, craziest, best month, but nothing replaces March when you're in the NCAA tournament.
Yeah.
Or even if you have conference tournament, NCAA tournament, that's a really cool time of year.
It's amazing. Yeah. Greg Romano asks us, hey, did Greg grow through? So he's asking if he went through the broadcasting program at BYU.
I did.
He mentions
so did Dave. And we should note, Dave and I came through together, and in fact, actually walked on the same day.
We sat next to each other on our graduation.
On the stage at the now being demolished HVAC. We were on the stage for our graduation ceremony together.
And Greg says the Tom Griffiths program, because Tom was running that program back when you guys were there. Tom was running the program.
Oh
right?
yeah.
Yeah, those were good times. We were sitting right in the middle, I think, and talked the whole time. And then we neither of us had to speak, so we just talked the whole time. I just gotten back from a trip. You've been busy, and then our careers did their thing, and then
now they're back.
And then now they're back, and been back like this for a long time.
So Dave and I came through the program together, graduated together. He went to Vegas. I stayed in this market, and then we've just kind of come back together.
Yeah.
And of course, he always had his toe in the BYU water in one way or another for most of that time. But
big toe. Sometimes a small toe.
Somebody else in here also came through that program, but he's a little older than you guys.
Yeah, you're a lot older than us. But
and through their master's program.
It's amazing
with
that
Mel Rogers and all those guys.
Hey, Mel's my man.
The journey that we've all been through, and going down this road and ask you to pick your top three.
He's never asked me to do that, which is good.
It was good because I know your top three. At least we went to find out from Greg, but you've been involved in so many of these moments that are part of people's lives, and I'm sure folks listening and they'll listen to the podcast as we're talking about stuff. They'll go, "Oh, what about this game? Oh, what about that game?"
And they'll remember where they were on all the ones that you mentioned. Just like Dave remembered he was driving in his car coming from a Temple assignment on that call. Like people will remember where they were when they heard that call.
No, so blessed to have been able to be a part of those experiences for fans. And again, they all enjoy them in different ways. Some of them aren't listening to the radio. Some of them get to hear the highlight after. However it is, I just feel personally blessed to be able to be given the challenge to ideally describe them in the best and most professional and appropriate way possible, and capture everything that people want to capture.
Just so you know that for these next 5 questions, there are no honorable mentions.
No, you just have to come with it.
It's just as is.
I know.
So, and I should mention, I can't even tell you how many times, like during the heyday of the Mountain West, when I was covering the Mountain West for NBC and for the Mountain West Network and all that, many times BYU would have a basketball game or football game. I'd be over on the Front Range or in Wyoming or wherever calling a game. And if it was at a different time than the BYU game, perhaps I'm down at the Air Force Academy. I'm now driving back to Denver to my hotel, and KSL, that great signal, I'm listening to Greg as I'm driving back into Denver.
Yeah,
So
50,000 watts. It knows no bounds.
I'm
at
calling
night.
a game someplace else, but I'm still tuned in to Greg.
Yeah. And now
dozens and dozens, if not hundreds of times over the years.
That's cool to know.
So
And,
really
and whether
cool.
it's KSL or the Sirius XM, which is satellite, and now the apps, which basically wherever you are, you've got the radio.
Right. Yeah.
It's amazing. Paul James did what he did for so long with essentially the AM signal to do, to reach Cougar Nation. And thankfully, it's a great signal. And a lot of people can listen to it a lot of places. Paul didn't have the technology at his disposal to have his descriptions as widely available as they are now. Yet, even with that limitation, if you want to put it that way, he is still the voice of the Cougars for a generation of fans. And I'd be remiss without paying homage to Paul for being my teacher, my mentor, my example, and the guy that gave me the belief that I could actually do this, because I didn't have it in myself until he said, go do it.
We're going to ask you about Paul in just a minute.
Yep. Okay.
5 questions for Greg Wrubell.
And there's some are the same. So favorite sports movie. Please do not say that nonsense thing that
Skateboard.
Yeah.
Oddly enough, it's Gleaming the Cube.
gosh, stop it.
Can't be. I would take the Hanson brothers over that because they're hockey.
No, on Slap, what's that?
Slapshot? Is that what it is?
No,
it's
he
not.
did not
There are
bring
a
up
lot of great
Slapshot.
hockey movies out there. It's not Slapshot. I was in my hotel in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. We actually played baseball at Gonzaga on the weekend. We stayed in Coeur d'Alene. It's in my hotel in Coeur d'Alene, doing some work and flipping through the channels, and it was on. And whenever it's on, I'm there. Wherever it is in the movie, I am there for the rest of the movie. Hoosiers.
Hoosiers.
Oh, yeah.
I was going to say
That one will suck you in from
classic.
wherever.
1A, Field
I
of
was
Dreams.
gonna say-
Field of Dreams, 1A.
Field of Dreams was on just like 2 nights ago.
It's right. It's the same
I'm
thing.
flicking through-
If you're ever there, you watch the rest of it.
Immediately in my head, I go, if you build it, they will come. And I couldn't stop. And Brendan's like, hun, it's 11 o'clock. I go, I don't care.
Rocky is pretty close.
And the Rockies, you can't just. I mean, there's some good Rockies.
We get a ton
down the line.
of our guests that are Rudy or Remember the Titans.
I'm not a Rudy or Remember the Titans guy.
Yeah,
I'm
we
just
get
not.
we get a lot of those. I would say those are the two most
I'm a
popular.
Rocky 3 guy though when it comes to the Rockies.
So
Really?
Is
I
it-
like 2. I just love the
Didn't
soundtrack.
Danny Ainge say Hoosiers?
He may have.
I think Danny
can't
may have
remember.
said Hoosiers. You're in good
Love
company.
Hoosiers.
Marie Osmond, I thought, said Hoosiers.
Oh yeah, Marie said Hoosiers. So there you go.
Okay.
So favorite singer or band?
I got a lot, but Rush for the Canadian heritage.
There's a
There
shock.
you go.
mean,
That's a
you know.
good one. That doesn't surprise me. Favorite
It's
breakfast.
been Rush since we were students. I knew that wasn't going to change.
Favorite breakfast cereal.
Crunch Berries.
Thank you.
Crunch Berries.
Like
Now, keep in mind, I live in a household where sweet cereals are verboten. We don't get sweet cereal. So basically, it's like if certain people are out of town, I'll go buy Crunch Berries.
do you ever
I know the-
like eat
I know what you're
all
saying.
of? Do you ever eat all of the old Captain Crunch part to save like 4 bites of nothing but the berries for the
No,
end?
I think the berries are too much. I like to have the actual Captain Crunch part of it. Yeah.
I do that sometimes, and sometimes on my Lucky Charms, I'll eat all of the oats and save just like 3 bites of nothing but Charms. So,
I was straight Captain Crunch for a long time.
That's
to me,
him.
To me, the berries were a nice bonus. I didn't feel like it took too much away from the actual Captain Crunch foundation. So I was
Yeah,
okay
I
with
don't
it.
need the berries.
he
I
likes
just like it
regular.
straight.
He likes regular Captain Crunch. Isn't there a new one that just came out? A new Captain Crunch with something.
There's a lot of stuff out
There's
there.
Scott
so
Warner,
many
somebody
distractions. I
just
stay
told me.
focused.
Yeah,
I just
exactly.
go right to
Okay,
it.
favorite hockey player of all time.
Come on, this is your wheelhouse.
No, because it requires a little bit of an. It's Wayne Gretzky. Okay.
Well, I don't
I
know
just
why
wrote
you
down
have to feel bad about it.
Because
I wrote down Wayne.
he is an Edmonton Oiler, and as a Calgary Flames fan,
Wow, that's
picking an
brutal.
Oiler doesn't make any sense whatsoever. How could you ever do it? But Gretzky's Gretzky, and when I was a kid growing up, and in my high school years, I would go to the paper every morning to see what he did the night before, and it was an amazing thing to see what he was doing. 'Cause
He was the great one.
People weren't doing it, and then to get to watch him in person, I would get to go to Flames Oilers games in Calgary, watch him on the ice. I was like, blown away by it, and still.
I interviewed
And then
him a few
I got
times.
to interview him, and that's the thing.
Yeah.
So when I got to interview
First
him,
class.
that was the one that really just kind of like, dude, you've got to know before going into this that I can't believe this is happening right now. What you mean to me and my hockey fandom, and the fact that you were an Oiler and I was a Flame, yet I still love you more than anyone.
And he was
Yeah.
first class in the interview. Getting a chance to interview him, you're just like, okay, this is why you're a star.
But
Yeah.
he was so good at such a young age. So we used to go up and do a hockey exchange, basketball exchange up in Ontario. We'd go to Brantford and to Hamilton, play the Hamilton schools and the Brantford Collegiate Institute. We'd stay with their families, go play in their basketball tournament, and then they would come down and play in our hockey tournament. And we'd kill them in basketball. They would kill us in hockey. It's a little more balanced now. But one of our superstar players was trying to pick up Wayne's girlfriend at the time.
Bad idea.
Yeah, it was not good. It didn't go over well.
He had enforcers,
Yep. Yeah. So Brantford Collegiate Institute, I think that's where he would have gone.
Yeah.
So, yep, a cool place. Loved the north neighbors of ours.
Favorite Calgary Flame, Lanny McDonald.
That was my next question.
Yeah.
Lanny.
Who's your favorite Calgary?
Lanny was quick on the ice.
And he had
Who's
the
your
best
favorite
mustache
Calgary,
in the history of sports.
Who's your favorite Calgary Stampeder? Mine's Greg Peterson.
Tom Forzani and Greg Peterson together.
There you go, Greg Peterson.
Greg, by the way, named the Calgary Booster Club Sports Person of the Year last week.
I just saw that. That's really cool.
Well deserved.
So Greg, for people that don't know, Greg played corner back in the late 70s, early 80s at BYU. Went up and had a long career with Calgary, and CFL was from up in Calgary.
His family was in our ward.
He's an attorney now. He's done a bunch of radio stuff and television stuff with Stampeders.
He's the color analyst on the Stampeders radio games.
Yeah,
Nice.
Yeah. So good guy, and he's just reconnected recently back with the program, which I think is
he
really
came
cool.
back to the Utah State game last year.
Really cool. So, okay, last one. Favorite advice from Paul James.
Prepare, and we're talking legal pad. Prepare. Write your stuff out. That's what I learned from Paul. Paul's pre-games were scripted, okay? And I said, Paul, you could do that you could ad-lib. You could ad-lib. He goes, I know, but I want to say it the way I want to say it. And so I would be like, we'd have our meetings before the game Friday nights in his hotel room, and he'd be in his bed with his legal pad scripting out his pre-game show. And I learned from him the art of scripting, if you will. And so I've always done it. I did the legal pad thing before the laptops came around, and now I script all my stuff in the pregame. And ideally, if I deliver it right, it's not going to sound to the audience like I'm reading a script, but I'm scripting things out for me and my analyst, my color partner, to bring a really well-structured pregame to the audience. And so that was just one element. When he says prepare, like there's more to it. But his spotting boards, I remember going to his house and having him show me his spotting boards and how he put together his spotting boards. So learning from Paul how to prepare for a game was invaluable for me. And it's the middle one of my 3 Ps of passion, preparation, presentation. So you can't scrimp on the preparation part of it. It'll show up on game day.
It takes me to flashback. We had Sione Pua on a few weeks ago on the show. Came in amazing. He's amazing. And attention to detail, we can just tell. But we asked him what advice he would give. What's his overriding advice for players? And he goes, well, my whole theme with these guys right now is you can never outperform your preparation, period. So we will prepare. And I thought, wow, that's a pretty powerful statement. You cannot, no matter how talented you are, you cannot outperform your preparation.
I've often thought I may not be the world's best broadcaster, but I can be the best prepared. That part I can control. I can put as much into preparation as humanly possible so that when I sit in on game day, there's a scripture that says, if you are prepared, you shall not fear.
Yes.
Right? And I don't want to fear. I don't want to have that feeling of being not ready in the broadcast booth.
Yeah, that's a lonely feeling, and you can tell when someone's unprepared, I think. When you watch, flip around, you watch enough games where you're like, that guy didn't go over any of those names, and some of those names are tough. Yeah. Sometimes you jack them up anyway, but I concur that preparation is the biggest thing, because we'd prepare and maybe not use half our stuff. But I know that if we didn't prepare, it would be a night when I need all the stuff.
If the action carries the game, and we've only used a quarter of what we prepared, we were well prepared. And the action carried the night, and then it was a great game. But we've all had games when we get in, we're like
4 hours long, boring games.
It's a good thing we did all this preparation, because this was a horrific game.
Of course, in radio, we have less of an obligation to worry about that, because no matter what happens, we're going to call the plays.
True,
but I rarely use everything I've got. It's rare that I use everything I've got, but I'm glad I've got it. I'm just glad I have it. And then, by the way, it's been really fun. I'm new to baseball, relatively speaking. This is my 3rd season doing baseball games. I'm very new at it, learning how to do it. But that's been a great thing too, is learning how to squeeze things into a baseball broadcast, because it's a different feel and flow from the other sports I do. That's a really cool thing too, is this late in life, quote unquote, is having a new challenge and a new sport to call and find a new way to call a game. I really enjoyed it.
You're be on the call this Thursday, right? If there's no snow through Saturday.
Actually, it looks good. Actually,
yeah, it's going to be a great weekend. It's going to be a lot of flooding, 60, but it's going to be a great weekend.
So everything might be covered with water, but Thursday through Saturday, BYU hosts San Francisco on BYU Radio.
Because those teams are both right now on the outside looking in on the top 6. Top 6 make the tournament in Vegas. Vegas. By the way, cool venue in Vegas that they're going to for this final year in the WCC. Top 6 make it. They're right now on the outside looking in. So USF and BYU are tied for 7th right now, 3 and 6. There's a lot of time to go. They're going to play 27 games. They're 9 games in. But winner of this series puts themselves where they need to be. Losers got to worry a little bit.
They got to get healthy. You know, Deming's got to be back.
They've been hit.
Sterner. And
really hard. Brock Watkins and Ozzie Pratt and now Chad Call. And so there are a lot of guys down right now. They got to get them back. I think if things break right, they get healthy at the right time, they could win series down the stretch and get where they need to be in this thing, but they got to get healthy.
Gary Scheide and I are going to be calling the TV side of it, so between the two of us, we'll have it wall-to-wall this weekend. The great Greg Wrubell's with us. We're going to do some business here, so we're going to just have you hang tight. You've been with us this long. You got a few more minutes?
Yeah, you bet.
Now, you can just chime in when you want, but we want to kind of get everyone up to speed on what's going on.
A few campus notes. Volleyball, 16-6, 12-0 at Smith Fieldhouse right now. The Cougars swept number 11 USC 3-1 and 3-0. What a great college volleyball environment the Smith Fieldhouse is. If you haven't had a chance to get out there, you need to get out there.
As exciting as it is in a full Marriott Center and a full LaVell Edwards Stadium, there's something else about this volleyball. It's something special.
So, hey, this week, and this is why I say this, Stanford at BYU Friday and Saturday, 7 p.m. Mountain.
April 14th and 15th. Which you might not have because I may have updated that before I sent that over to you. They're off this week.
Oh, yes, next week.
And then it's next week. On BYU TV. And Sean Olmstead's going to go for career win number 150.
So fun. Yeah.
He hadn't been doing it very long. He just wins. Wins over there.
He just wins. Okay.
Baseball 9-18, 5-3 at home, 3-6 in the WCC. Washington State beat the Cougars yesterday 6-1. Greg on the call there.
I'm telling you, man, I felt so bad for the guys just because we show up there and the snow's gotten cleared off, but it feels like, I think, 24 when they rolled in. Yeah. And granted, both teams got to play in it, but they've just played. Baseball, you want to feel good. You want to feel warm and loose, and they've had so few games where they can just go have that loose, warm, fired-up feeling because they've been so cold. A lot of cold games like yesterday. Kudos to the fans that show up, by the way. BYU fans showing up everywhere, but you really have to tough it out these days with the way the weather's been going.
Softball can't get any games in either.
Everything keeps getting canceled. Yeah. So, speaking of softball, 17-9. Is that right? Yeah. 17-9.
They start league now, right?
Yeah. They play 11 P5 opponents this season in softball. They're not afraid to play it. That's another program that's like, bring it on. Yeah. We're ready. Ready for the Big 12. Is it the Purple and Gold Challenge? 2-2 wins against Louisiana and North Carolina State, and 2 defeats to number 12 LSU. So there you go. That's how you're 2-2.
Another snow out today. They were supposed to be up in Idaho State.
At Idaho State. That's not happening in Pokey, right?
Right. So Friday through Saturday, Santa Clara on the road in the conference opener. The next home game for softball, if they can get one,
this is a big one,
is Monday against Utah, 5 o'clock Mountain Time on the BYU TV app. That was a game that had been pushed back, and we're going to have a decent weekend. I think it's going to go into next week. I think we're going to be near 70 around here, which is something we haven't felt for since last October, maybe.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's April, you guys. It's supposed to be 60.
I don't know where all this snow is going to go once we hit 70 degrees.
So how about men's golf? At Stanford, the Cougars finished 13th, plus 18. Oklahoma won the tournament at minus 18. So Carson Lundell was BYU's top individual performer, tied with 8 golfers for 24th. Next up for men's golf, Western Intercollegiate. That's next Monday through Wednesday at Santa Cruz.
The Masters starts on Thursday. Mike Weir, the 2003 champ, will be back there. He's at the Champions Dinner tonight, or it's probably over by now, wearing his green jacket. Tony Finau, who we've adopted as a BYU fan.
I walked the course with Tony last year a bunch because I was at the Masters, and with Tony's dad, who's just a splendidly wonderful person. Took us all around, all the places you're not supposed to go.
Was that your first Masters?
Yeah, it was my first one. Okay. Yeah.
Hideki Matsuyama didn't attend BYU, but Corey Yoshimura did.
That's right. I hope
He's
Corey's
PG
listening
executive in Japan, loyal listener to the show. And then Dan Forsman played the Masters 6 times. He's not in the field, but I wrote a story about his top 4 experiences at Augusta. That's at Deseret.com. That turned out pretty good.
Really cool.
He's a fascinating guy.
You sent that to me, and we love Dan Forsman. And he on the senior tour, he's been trying to get back in shape, coming back from some injuries. He looks like he's pretty fit and can get back.
He may get out there later in the summer.
To compete later this summer. So we hope the best for Dan. Women's golf, 6th place finish at Avenue Spring Break Challenge in Maui. Rough to have to go to Maui this time here when this is going on here. Alicia May Mateo, 6th place finish. She's been playing really well.
She's having a great year.
BYU Intercollegiate at Riverside Country Club.
That's why we're having good weather Monday and Tuesday.
Right, because that's supposed to be this next week, right? So we'll see how that goes. The course was open, and of course it's closed now. So hopefully that sun comes out. Hey, there's supposed to be an Easter egg hunt there on Saturday for my grandkids. So let's just hope for good weather.
Let's hope.
So,
Carrie Roberts was going to be with us tonight. Had a scheduling conflict. She's going to join us in 2 weeks ahead of the WCC Championship. Speaking of championships, UConn beat San Diego State last night, 76-59 to win the men's title. The Aztecs could not buy a basket.
That's how they roll.
Yeah, they played D, but what was it? Didn't they go like 10, 12 minutes, maybe longer without a field goal?
Here's the thing against
and they were still in the game
against other teams in this tournament. They've been able to just shut people that they don't make shots for 8 minutes, and the other team can't score. UConn's just too skilled offensively and pulled away.
Like Brian Dutcher said, we're a team that can win games without shooting it well, and that's a good thing to be able to lean on unless you're playing a team like UConn.
Well, and that's the niche that Steve built there with them, that Brian's taken. It's like we can compete, be a perennial top 20 team. We can't get the same kids that Kansas and Kentucky and Duke get. We can get guys that will just defend like nobody's business, and that'll make us competitive. Yeah. And this year, they had enough offense to get them to the championship game. Kudos to those guys.
And some magical moments.
And Greg knows those guys really well, too. That's a great staff. Those are good people. And so congratulations to Dutch and Matt and David.
Sam Scholl got more TV time as an assistant at San Diego State than he ever got at San Diego's head coach.
That's true. He's got them there, too. And so congratulations. You make it to that game. Wow.
Brian Dutcher was always my pregame interview when BYU played San Diego State. I did Steve Fisher for maybe the first couple years he was there. Then he delegated it over to Brian. So Dutch was always the guy I would talk to before every San Diego State game when he was the assistant there. So it was fun to see him get his team to where he is now with those guys.
Yeah. Women's hoops, LSU beat Iowa 102-85. How many wins do you think BYU's women's team will get next year with this recruiting class that they have coming in?
Oh, gosh.
I don't know, maybe that's not fair to say wins, but I mean, I think they would be able to.
I don't know what their non-conference schedule is going to look like.
The question is, can they compete?
I'm guessing they're right in the middle of the Big 12
next year? I think they can be with this recruiting class. They're going to be young, and then they're going to get better than next year.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that they've amassed a great group to get to
best
moving
recruiting
forward.
class they've ever had.
How deep did the Big 12 women's tournament entry field go?
I don't know how far Texas went. I think Texas won the conference tournament.
How many teams went in from the Big 12? I guess what I'm at. Like how deep will they go? Like, for example, men, are you looking to get 6, 7, 8 every year?
Yeah, it's not like that.
No, it's not. It's not quite the same.
But Shaley had a big tournament in the Big 12 tournament.
Texas won that tournament with Shaley.
And then they looked pretty good, and then they started to drop. But Iowa was dominant, and then LSU was big and physical.
With BYU going into the Big 12, it's going to be a shift in mindset, right? Because you may end up competing for fewer championships, but ideally playing in more NCAA tournaments just because of how deep that league will go compared to the WCC.
Hey, finish 6th in basketball, you're probably in.
Yeah.
Right. That's how it goes.
Next week, Matt and Savannah Shaw, father-daughter singing sensation with over 1.5 million followers on Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram, going to join us. You can learn all about them at mattandsavannahmusic.com. April 18th, Brian Logan and Carrie Roberts will be here. Brandon Doman and Byron Rex will join us before the NFL draft. And Johnny Harleen will join us May 2nd. He's down there playing his band in Las Vegas, and he'll join us via Zoom on May 2nd. We're working to get Gennaro Guilford since we've had all the other defensive coaches.
He'll be the last of the defensive
So we got a big month coming up in April.
Johnny made my career. There you go.
The back to Harleen.
Yeah.
And we'll remind him of that when he's on.
We'll tell him.